3 years passed. 3 years of messages, voice notes, late-night calls, and monthly transfers. 3 years of listening to her talk about her dreams, her classes, her future. I watched her grow, or at least I thought I did. From struggling, bookstore employee to a student, finally regaining control of her life. I felt proud. Not in a possessive way, but in the way someone might feel when they've helped a flower bloom in a forgotten garden. I believed I was part of her journey, that my support had allowed her to stand on her own again. But deep down, I still longed for more. We had built something meaningful, at least from my side. I wanted to close the distance, to stop being just, say a voice in her ear and become a real presence in her life. I wanted to meet her, hold her hand, look into her eyes, and know that everything we had shared over the years wasn't just a dream wrapped in pixels and promises. And so, I made a decision. Was going to surprise her. She told me her semester break was coming up, 2 full weeks with no classes. I'm just going to rest and work on my portfolio, she said. Nothing exciting. I smiled when I heard that. Perfect, no excuses, no scheduling conflicts. I started planning right away. I booked a train ticket to her city, reserved a small hotel just a few blocks from the address she had given me long ago. The one she said was her grandparents' old apartment, where she had been living alone since the pandemic. I even ordered a bouquet of her favorite flowers and had them sent to the hotel ready for the big moment. But most importantly, I bought a ring. Nothing extravagant. I wasn't rich, but I chose a delicate silver band with a small, beautifully cut stone, understated, elegant, and meaningful. Just like her, or at least the version of her I knew. In my head I played the scene over and over again, me showing up at her doorstep, her face lighting up in surprise and joy, tears, laughter. Maybe she'd throw her arms around me, whisper, "I can't believe you're here." And then maybe I'd kneel, open the box, ask her the question that had been growing in my heart for months. It felt like the perfect fairy tale ending. The night before my trip, we had our usual call. She sounded tired. "Long day," she said. "I'm just going to crash early." I told her to rest well, that I loved her. "I love you more," she whispered back. Those were the last words she ever said to me without knowing the truth. The next day, I arrived in her city just after sunset. The train ride was long, but my excitement kept me awake. I kept checking the ring box in my coat pocket. My hands were sweaty, my chest tight with anticipation. I walked to her neighborhood, following the map she'd sent me 2 years ago. The building was exactly like I remembered from the photos, old, cozy, with ivy creeping up the brick walls and a soft golden glow coming from the windows. It felt surreal, standing in front of it after imagining this moment for so long. I took a deep breath and walked up to the building. Just before I reached the front steps, the door opened, and that's when I saw him. A man, mid-30s, tall, relaxed, stepped outside holding a trash bag in one hand and his phone in the other. He looked comfortable, like he belonged. Then he turned back toward the door still open behind him and called out, "Hey babe, you want anything else from the store?" My heart stopped. From inside I heard her voice, Nina's voice, light and casual. "No, I'm good. Just hurry back before it rains." The man chuckled and walked off down the sidewalk whistling. I didn't move, couldn't move. My legs felt like they'd sunk into the pavement. I looked up at the window above the door. Soft golden light spilled through the curtains. A familiar table lamp, a plant she had once sent me a photo of. It was her apartment, but she wasn't alone. She had never been alone. The realization hit like a slow, heavy wave, suffocating, disorienting, irreversible. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't yell or demand answers. I simply turned around, walked to the park a few blocks away and sat on a bench. I stared at the ring box still in my pocket, unopened. 3 years of my life, poured into someone who had built a life with someone else. I thought of every message, every lie, every "I miss you," and "I wish you were here." All of it, scripted, rehearsed, meaningless, and all I could think was, what the hell have I been doing? I met her during one of the loneliest chapters of my life. It was early 2020, and the world was slowly unraveling into chaos. Isolation, anxiety, uncertainty. They crept into my life like fog, thickening with each passing day. I worked from home alone, in a small apartment that echoed more with silence than with life. Social interaction had become a luxury, and loneliness, a new kind of norm. That's when I found her. Her name was Nina. We crossed paths in an online support group for people dealing with emotional burnout and anxiety. I had posted something vague but honest, about feeling lost, about trying to hold it together when everything around me seemed to be falling apart. Out of the dozens of replies I received, hers stood out. It wasn't filled with empty positivity or generic encouragement. Instead, she simply wrote, "I get it, I've been there too, you're not crazy for feeling this way." That one sentence pulled me in. We exchanged private messages, slowly at first, just testing the waters. She told me about her past, how she had left college after her parents passed away in a car accident, how she had been in a toxic relationship that nearly broke her, how she was trying to rebuild her life from scratch. She lived alone, she said, in her late grandparents' apartment, trying to survive off a part-time job at a bookstore while planning to go back to school for graphic design. There was a sadness to her, but also a kind of softness that made you want to listen. She wasn't dramatic or overly emotional. If anything, she was quiet, thoughtful. She never asked for sympathy. Maybe that's why I offered it freely. As the weeks passed, our conversations grew longer, deeper. We went from messaging once a day to talking every night, sometimes through voice notes, sometimes long text chains. She said her phone wasn't great, that her Wi-Fi was spotty, and she couldn't do video calls often. I didn't mind. Her voice was soothing, and her presence, even virtual, was comforting. It felt like I had finally found someone who understood me. I started opening up too. I told her about my struggles as a freelance developer, about my failed relationships, about my tendency to overthink, to stay awake at night playing out conversations. That never happened. She never judged, she listened, always listened. It wasn't long before I started looking forward to hearing from her more than anything else in my day. 3 months in, she told me she was falling behind on rent. "I don't want to ask," she said, "but I'm scared. I might lose the apartment, and I can't go back to living with my ex. That would destroy me." She didn't beg, she didn't guilt-trip me. She just let the silence hang there, heavy and vulnerable. I offered to help. I remember feeling this strange rush of purpose, like I was finally useful to someone, like I could protect her from the pain she'd already suffered too much of. I sent enough to cover the rent and a bit more, just in case, I told her. She was overwhelmed with gratitude. Said no one had ever helped her like that before. Said she'd pay me back once she got into school and found steady work. I told her not to worry, and so it began. That first payment became another, then another. Groceries, school supplies, a new laptop when hers broke down. I even paid for an online design course she said would help her build a portfolio. It added up, but I didn't keep track. I wasn't just supporting her financially, I was invested emotionally. I believed in her, in us. To me, it wasn't about the money. It was about building something with someone I genuinely cared for, someone who had seen my broken pieces and still stayed. Our relationship continued to grow, though always online. Every time I asked to visit, she had a reason to say no. Too busy, midterms coming, not feeling well. She'd promise, soon. I want our first time to be special. I trusted her, because when someone gives you the kind of attention and intimacy you've been starved of, your brain starts filling in the blanks. You start believing not just in them, but in the version of yourself you become when you're with them. She made me feel like a better man. I never thought to question it, not once. I don't remember how long I sat on that bench. Time didn't feel real anymore. The sun had long since dipped below the skyline, and the street lamps had flickered on without my noticing. I sat there like a ghost, one hand gripping the ring, box, the other clenched in my coat pocket. My breath was shallow. My thoughts were louder than the traffic, the birds, even my heartbeat. I had always imagined that if someone betrayed me, I'd be furious. I'd yell, curse, demand answers. But in that moment there was no rage, only a hollow, stunned quiet. The kind of silence that follows an explosion, not before but after. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I walked aimlessly for a while, my legs carrying me away from her street, as my mind replayed everything. Every conversation, every excuse, every carefully placed lie. How could I have missed it? She told me she lived alone, that she was struggling, that no one understood her the way I did. And yet, just hours ago, I saw her talking casually to another man, laughing, relaxed, calling him babe, as if she hadn't just told me she loved me the night before. Back at my hotel room, I stared at the ceiling for hours. Sleep didn't come. I kept going over our history, looking for the signs I had ignored. Her excuses about video calls, the times she said her roommate made noise in the background but insisted she didn't want to talk about it. The sudden changes in her schedule. Her odd reaction when I once offered to visit. She always found a way to deflect, to delay, and I always believed her. Or maybe I just wanted to. Because it's easier to believe a beautiful lie than to face the ugly truth. But now I couldn't pretend anymore. I needed answers. And I didn't want them from her, not yet. I wanted facts. I wanted the full picture, unfiltered and undeniable. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. I searched online and found a small local firm with decent reviews. The next morning I walked into their dimly lit office, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, still carrying that unopened ring box in my coat. The man at the desk listened patiently as I explained the situation. I gave him her name, the address she'd given me, and every bit of information I had, old photos, screenshots of our chats, voice notes, emails. I told him what I had seen the night before and what I needed him to find out. He didn't ask why I wanted to know. He didn't judge. He just nodded, took notes, and said, "Give me 5 days, 5 days, that's all I needed." I returned home the next day. It was strange being back in my apartment, like stepping into a life that no longer fit. The place felt different, quieter. I looked around at the framed photo on my desk, just me smiling awkwardly, with a coffee cup Nina had once told me was cute. That mug was gone now. So was the version of her I thought I knew. Still, I didn't block her, not yet. Instead, I played along. We kept texting, just like always. She said she was working on a big school project and barely had time to breathe. I said I missed her. She replied with, "I can't wait to see you soon, maybe this summer." I almost laughed out loud. I asked if she was still living alone. "Of course," she replied, "just me and my thoughts like always." The audacity, the ease with which she lied. It didn't even faze her. And me? I smiled, because I knew something she didn't. Her time was running out. By the 4th day, I received an email from the investigator. No subject line, just a single sentence. "Call me when you're alone." My stomach tightened. I stepped into my bedroom, shut the door, and dialed the number. "Mr. Grant." He answered immediately. "Yes. We've confirmed the man you saw lives at the apartment full-time. He and the woman, Nina, have been together for several years. Neighbors identified them as a couple. We also ran a public record search." I held my breath. "They're married." It was like hearing the words in slow motion. "Married?" I repeated, barely able to speak. "For over 4 years," he said. "Marriage license was filed in this city. Everything checks out." I thanked. Him hung up and just sat there in the stillness. 4 years. That meant they were already married when I met her. When she told me she was single. When she cried about being alone. When I wired her rent money month after month, I had spent 3 years building a fantasy, while she had been living a completely different reality. And the worst part? She never flinched, never hesitated. She said she loved me with the same mouth she used to kiss her husband goodnight. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. In that moment, I only felt one thing. I need her to know that I know. I sat in silence for hours after the call. No music, no movement, just me, the low hum of my refrigerator, and the sound of my own thoughts spiraling out of control. She was married for over 4 years. That one fact played on a loop in my head, like a broken record I couldn't shut off. It made everything unravel so fast. Every moment, Every phone call, every "I miss you," every "I wish you were here with me." All those nights she whispered, "I love you more," while her husband was likely asleep in the next room, or worse, lying beside her. It wasn't just deception. It was theater. She had performed for me, played a character, crafted a false reality so vivid that I fell in love with a person who didn't even exist. And I wasn't just the fool in the audience, I was funding the entire production. It stung, more than I thought it would. Not just because of the betrayal, but because of how complete it was. There wasn't a crack in the foundation. There was never a foundation at all, and yet I wasn't ready to scream. Not yet. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done, not through anger or revenge, through truth, cold, undeniable, unforgiving. So I began preparing. I started by going through all our messages, every single one. I had thousands. 3 years of texts, audio notes, emails. I filtered and flagged the most damning ones where she explicitly said she lived alone, where she claimed to have no support, where she cried about having no one to lean on but me. I paired those with the bank statements, rent money, tuition help, laptop for online classes, medical bills, grocery deliveries, subscriptions, over $32,000 in total. Every payment matched a story she told me. Every story I now knew was fiction. Next came the photos, the ones she had sent of her apartment, her cat, her desk, a half-finished painting, a steaming bowl of soup with a caption that said, "Dinner for one again." But now I had the investigators' photos too, clear images of her, holding hands with her husband, walking into their shared apartment, kissing outside their front door, same location, same walls, same desk lamp, different man, different truth. It was all so perfectly staged, so deliberate. And then I wrote the letter, not to her, to him, to the husband of the woman you think you know. My name is Ethan. I've been in a relationship with your wife for the past 3 years. She told me she was single, living alone, trying to rebuild her life. She said she loved me, needed me, and I believed her. I've sent her over $30,000 during this time, money I believed was helping her survive. Money I thought was supporting her dream of going back to school. I didn't know about you. I didn't know she was lying to both of us. I'm not writing to hurt you. I'm writing because you deserve to know the truth. I've included messages, photos, transaction records, and copies of everything she sent me. Whatever you decide to do with this information, that's up to you. I'm done. But you need to see her for who she really is. Ethan, I printed everything. Messages, screenshots, payment records, even copies of the marriage certificate from public records. I packaged it neatly into a manila envelope and addressed it to the apartment. No return address, just a simple label. For him, not her. The next morning I mailed it. And then I waited, not out of curiosity, not out of revenge, but because I wanted silence to do what screaming never could. The first day passed. Nothing. The second day, she messaged me like normal. "Morning, babe. I had a weird dream about you. Maybe it means we'll meet soon." Replied with a heart emoji. My final lie. Day 3 came and went, then 4, still no sign. But on the 5th night, my phone rang. Her name flashed across the screen. I let it ring, once, twice, then I answered. My phone rang just past midnight. I had been expecting this call, though maybe not at this exact hour. I stared at the screen for a moment. Her name glowed in the dark, just as it always had. Nina. My thumb hovered over the red button, but I didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, I answered. I didn't say anything. "Ethan?" Her voice cracked. It was quiet, almost a whisper. I heard rustling, like she had been pacing or sitting on the floor. I still didn't respond. "Ethan, please, I need to talk to you." Silence stretched between us. Then she exhaled and said the first honest thing I had heard from her in years. "Why did you send that to him?" There it was. No denial, no confusion, just a question soaked in panic and shame. She knew exactly what I had done. exactly what she had hidden. The performance was over, and the mask had finally cracked. I took a deep breath and said calmly, "Because he deserved the truth just like I did." Her voice shook. "You don't understand. It wasn't like that." "Oh," I replied. "So how was it, Nina? Were you not married the whole time we were together? Was that some kind of misunderstanding too?" A pause. Then a breathy, defensive whisper. "It was complicated," I almost laughed. "Complicated? You looked pretty comfortable with him in those photos. Kissing, holding hands. Living in the same apartment you said you were barely affording on your own." "That wasn't—" she started, then stopped herself. "You don't know what my marriage is like. He was never there for me emotionally. We were basically roommates for years. But you slept in the same bed." Sometimes. I shook my head even though she couldn't see it. Her voice, she was getting louder now. The cracks in her composure were starting to show. "You have no idea what I've been through," she said, almost spitting the words. "I was alone, emotionally abandoned. You think just because we were married that it meant something? He didn't care about me, he never did." "And yet," I replied, "you lived with him. Took my money while he slept next to you. Lied to me every single day. Lied to him too." "It wasn't like that," she snapped. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I needed help, and you gave it. I didn't ask you to fall in love with me." "No, Nina. You didn't ask. You made me." She went quiet. "You knew exactly what you were doing, every 'I love you,' every 'I wish you were here,' every story about struggling alone. That wasn't survival. That was manipulation." I heard her sniffling on the other end. "He left," she whispered. "He found the envelope, read everything. He packed his bags and said I disgusted him. I didn't speak. I have no one." "Now," she said, "no one left." I closed my eyes. "You had someone, you had me, but you chose to keep lying, and now you're facing the cost." Her voice softened again, desperate. "Ethan, I'm sorry, I didn't know how to stop. It started small and then it just kept going. You were kind, you made me feel safe, and I didn't want to lose that." "But you did," I said. "The moment you chose to lie instead of come clean, that's when you lost me." She started crying, sobbing really, the kind of tears she used to send me in voice notes when she needed money or sympathy or both. But this time, they didn't move. For me, they didn't tug at my heart the way they used to, because now I knew what they were, tools. She kept crying. I let her, and then I said the last words I would ever speak to her. "I don't hate you, Nina. I just feel sorry for you." She gasped softly, like that cut deeper than shouting ever could. Then I ended the call. I didn't wait for her to say anything more. I didn't want to hear another excuse, another tear-soaked sentence designed to pull me back in. I blocked her number, blocked her on every platform, erased her photos, deleted her contact. But I didn't delete the memories. Not yet, because I wasn't done learning from them. The days that followed were quiet, painfully quiet. There were no more late-night calls, no messages lighting up my screen, no voice notes, no "I miss you" texts, no photos of coffee mugs or rainy windows captioned "Wish you were here," just silence, and it hurt, not because I missed her, not really, but because silence was the sound truth makes after it detonates. The fallout doesn't roar, it lingers, and it forces you to sit with everything you didn't want to feel when the lies were still soft and sweet. I found myself checking my phone out of habit, opening our old messages like a reflex, not to reread them, just to see them, just to make sure they really happened, that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Because sometimes it did feel like a dream, a cruel, slow-burning dream. 3 years of devotion, affection, false hope, and then it was gone like smoke in the wind. But unlike dreams, this had a paper trail and scars. I couldn't sleep well the first week. My brain kept playing it, all back. The first time she called me babe, the first time she said she loved me, the first time I sent her money just to help. Every moment now felt poisoned, contaminated by what I knew had been happening behind the scenes. I had fallen in love with an actress, and I had financed the performance. But somewhere in that haze of heartbreak, clarity began to surface. It came in small moments. The first time I walked outside without thinking about texting her where I was going. The first time I slept through the night without checking my phone for her goodnight message. The first time I made dinner for myself, played my music, and realized the quiet no longer scared me. It wasn't healing. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something else, freedom. For the first time in years, I didn't owe anyone anything. I didn't have to filter my emotions to protect someone else's fragility. I didn't have to wonder if she was okay, or if she was lying to me again. I didn't have to guess whether I mattered. I was just me again, a little more broken, a little more guarded, but real. I started therapy, not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to understand why I had let it happen for so long. Why I had ignored the red flags, why I had clung so tightly to someone who gave me breadcrumbs while I handed over the whole bakery. My therapist helped me see what I couldn't before, that I didn't fall for her because she was perfect. I fell because she made me feel needed. And when you're lonely long enough, being needed can feel a lot like being loved. But they're not the same. One gives, the other takes. And I had been giving for 3 years. To someone who was never empty, just greedy. A few weeks later, I went through the photos one last time. Not the ones the investigator sent. Those I had deleted long ago. No, I looked at her photos. The ones she had sent over the years. Little snapshots of a life I now knew was curated, filtered, carefully staged. The desk with the coffee mug, the blanket on the couch, the cat she said she rescued from the street. They weren't just objects, they were props. I should have been angry, but strangely I wasn't. I felt pity, not for myself. For her, because someone who has to build a life from lies, layer upon layer, can never truly rest. They're always performing, always running, always hiding. She probably thought she was in control, that she was smart enough to juggle 2 lives. But eventually all illusions collapse under their own weight, and when they do, the silence swallows you, just like it did her. The last thing I did was write myself a letter, not a dramatic farewell, not a journal entry of pain, just a reminder. You are not stupid, you are not weak, you are not broken for having believed, but you are responsible for protecting your heart. Next time, you will ask harder questions. Next time, you will trust, but only what is shown, not what is promised. And most importantly, you will not shrink yourself just to be someone else's savior. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, not to forget, but to remember, because healing doesn't mean erasing the past. It means learning how to live alongside it, without letting it define you, and that's exactly what I was learning to do, one honest breath at a time. 6 months have passed, half a year since the call, since the final tearful confession, the silence that followed, and the moment I finally let go. Time didn't fix everything. It never really does. But it gave me space, the kind of space you need to see the full picture after being too close for too long, and when I finally stepped back far enough, I saw the truth. She didn't break me, she tested me, and I passed, not without scars, not without pain, but with my integrity intact. And that, I've come to learn, is worth more than any apology she could have given. The first few weeks were a storm. I kept thinking about the years I had lost, the money I'd never get back, the love I gave so freely to someone who only saw, say it as leverage. But little by little the storm began to quiet, not because I forgot but because I forgave, not her, but myself, for not seeing it sooner, for loving with blind eyes, for confusing desperation with devotion, forgiving her. That's not something I owed. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't always noble. Sometimes it's unnecessary. Some people don't need forgiveness, they need distance. And that's exactly what I gave her. Permanent, irreversible distance. But for myself, I chose to stop carrying the guilt. Because loving someone deeply, even the wrong person, isn't something to be ashamed of. It proves your heart still works, even when the world tries to make it numb. I've changed since then. Not in the bitter, hardened way you might expect. I didn't become colder. I became clearer. I say no more easily now. I ask more questions. I don't mistake vulnerability for truth or softness for sincerity. And I've stopped romanticizing potential. People are not projects, and love should never require a spreadsheet. To track your worth, I still believe in love, wholeheartedly, but not the kind that comes wrapped in secrecy or half-truths. Not the kind that drains your bank account and calls it support. Not the kind that exists only in texts and promises, but never shows up when it counts. No, now I believe in the kind of love that feels peaceful, grounded, honest. Even when it's messy, especially when it's messy, and when it arrives I'll be ready, but not desperate. People often ask me if I'd do anything differently. If I could go back, would I still help her? Still love her? And my answer is always the same. I'd still be kind, but I wouldn't be blind. Kindness isn't weakness, but kindness without boundaries. That's self-harm disguised as generosity. I learned that the hard way, and strangely, I'm grateful for it, because now I know how to protect myself. Not with walls, but with wisdom. A few weeks ago I found that ring again, the one I never gave her. It had been sitting in a drawer, buried under receipts and old notebooks. I held it in my palm for a long time, not out of sadness, but reflection. That ring wasn't a symbol of love lost. It was a reminder of who I used to be, of how far I've come, and of everything I refuse to settle for again. I didn't throw it away. I didn't pawn it. I kept it. Not because I'm holding on to the past, but because it reminds me that even my worst mistake came from a place of hope. And hope, no matter how painful, is never something to regret. So, if you're someone who's been through something like this, if you've loved and lost not just a person but your sense of trust and identity along the way, let me say this. You are not weak for having believed. You are not stupid for having loved. You are not broken for having cared too much. You are human, and some lessons are only learned in heartbreak. I learned that loyalty is a gift, not an obligation, that love without truth is just manipulation in disguise, and that walking away isn't failure, it's freedom. I may not have ended up with the woman I thought I loved, but I ended up with something better, myself, whole, wiser, and finally, at peace. The end.